Hello, this is Music Tech Explained, the visual approach. If you plan to mix in Dolby Atmos or just want to listen in Dolby Atmos, it might be a good idea to watch this video to better understand what Dolby Atmos is, what it is not, and more importantly, the many challenges around it. Welcome to Music Tech Explained, the visual approach. My name is Edgar Rothermich, author of the best-selling book series Graphically Enhanced Manuals. In this video, I will explain Dolby Atmos with all the important information you need to know before you start to mix in Dolby Atmos. Even if you only listen to music in Dolby Atmos, which you definitely should, this video contains valuable insights you don't want to miss. Also, if you are confused about Apple's spatial audio, like everybody else on the planet, I will explain why it is the same as Dolby Atmos and at the same time why it is not. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified about exciting new videos in my Music Tech Explained YouTube channel. So let's get started. The video has 6 chapters plus 1 bonus chapter. In the introduction, I give a perspective of Dolby Atmos to show where it came from, because it didn't just fall out of the sky one day. In the second chapter, I discuss the troubling question of how many speakers you need to buy before you can start mixing in Dolby Atmos. Spoiler alert, none. In chapter 3, I give an overview about the software and hardware requirements for Dolby Atmos. Then in chapter 4, we dive into the details to learn what Dolby Atmos is. In chapter 5, I show the new workflows, the different steps when mixing your Dolby Atmos song. And in the final chapter, I provide a few information about the Dolby Atmos distribution steps, including Apple's spatial audio that caused a lot of question and concerns in the Dolby Atmos production community. I added a bonus chapter at the end of this video to explain a little bit about binaural audio, an important key element of listening to Dolby Atmos and immersive audio in general. Keep in mind that Dolby Atmos is used in many fields like film, music, games, broadcast, etc. And the information I provide in this video is helpful regardless in what field of audio production you are working in. However, I concentrate a bit more on Dolby Atmos music. I also released a book, Mixing in Dolby Atmos Part 1, How It Works, the first comprehensive book about Dolby Atmos. I get into much more depth of what I show in this video with many unique diagrams and graphics that you won't find anywhere else. On 284 pages, I explain not only the Dolby Atmos renderer software application in great detail, but also the Dolby Atmos ecosystem, the technology, the delivery mechanisms, all the new file formats, and especially new mixing and mastering workflows. In this first chapter, I provide some perspective about Dolby Atmos, which is important to eliminate some misconceptions. Dolby Atmos is a technology introduced by Dolby Laboratories in 2012, with the first movie, Disney's Brave, mixed in Dolby Atmos. So, Dolby Atmos is already 10 years old, and keep in mind that it is a sound format originally developed for film and not for music. That little fact explains a lot of challenges when we look at mixing music in Dolby Atmos. The very first insight you need when jumping into the Dolby Atmos world is the understanding of the evolution of sound reproduction. There are 4 steps. First, all sound recordings and reproductions starting in the 1900s were mono, a single spot source where sound was emitted. Around 1930s, stereophonic recordings then used 2 speakers to create a one-dimensional sound field. Then the one-dimensional sound reproduction was expanded to a 2-dimensional sound field with the introduction of surround sound by placing more speakers around you. Although the invention of surround is credited to Ray Dolby starting in the 1970s, there were earlier experiments like the Disney movie Fantasia in the 1940s. Now the 4th step in the evolution is the move from a 2-dimensional sound field to the 3-dimensional sound field. That's where the buzzword 3D audio is coming from. Now, in addition to all the speakers around you, hence the name surround sound like 5.1, there are additional speakers above you. That means now you are immersed in sound, coming from all directions, and that is where the term immersive audio is coming from. There is one little detail in that evolution of sound reproduction that you have to be aware of. The evolution was different for film sound and music sound. The evolution of film sound was very straightforward. The first sound in movies started in the early 30s as mono. Then in the 40s came stereo sound experiments that evolved into the late 70s to the early surround sound formats mainly developed by Dolby. Virtually every film and many TV shows and broadcasts were mixed in surround over the years. The step into immersive sound started 2005 with the introduction of Auro 3D and then later the dominant format of Dolby Atmos in 2012. So the important fact to keep in mind is that Dolby Atmos was originally developed and introduced for film sound. It was a film sound format. Now let's compare that to the evolution of recorded sound without picture, just music recordings. The early sound recordings in the late 1800s, of course, started with mono. Then in the 1930s, the introduction of stereo, which became hugely successful with first vinyl, then cassette tapes, and then CDs, all the way to digital audio file distribution we have nowadays. Then in 2019, Dolby introduced Dolby Atmos Music, the step into the immersive sound format. But what happened in between? Where was the big surround era in music recording? Michael Jackson's Thriller, Bruce Springsteen, Garth Brooks? Nothing. There was a big dry spell and sound was pretty much stuck in stereo since the 1930s, at least for commercial music production. The attempts with quadrophony in the 70s and the DVD audio debacle in 2000 to 2007 showed that for some reason the mass consumer audience was not interested in anything other than stereo when listening to music. So what makes Dolby Atmos different? Will it ultimately fail like surround sound after the initial hype fades off, as some people predict? Definitely not, because the main reason why those audio surround formats failed are not there anymore. Something important has changed, as I will explain a little later. With new technology always comes new terminology. Although terminology should make life easier by using specific words that have specific agreed upon meaning, very often those terminology erode and then a term can mean different things depending on who you ask. Here are just a few examples regarding sound reproduction. Immersive audio is the generic term for sound systems that reproduce a three-dimensional sound field. That's why the term 3D audio or 360 audio has the same meaning. Unfortunately, some people also use the term surround to describe immersive audio, which can be confusing when differentiating established sound formats like quad, 5.1 or 7.1 that are only two-dimensional with true immersive sound formats that are three-dimensional. So be careful with the term surround. With the term spatial audio, it gets even more confusing. Originally, it was a generic term used like immersive audio, where you can receive sound from all directions to give you the impression that you hear the sound source around you and not only hear the actual speaker source. But then Apple kind of hijacked that term for their own immersive sound technology. I will explain that later because Apple created some confusion about what spatial audio is and what it is not. And then there are many other related terms like ambisonics, Auro 3D, 360 sound, 360 reality audio, and also Dolby Atmos, which are all different formats that can produce immersive sound. And last but not least, there is binaural audio, the key to success of immersive audio, which I explain in the bonus chapter at the end. Okay, now let's jump right into Dolby Atmos with the first important question: how many speakers do we need in our studio to mix in Dolby Atmos? A conventional surround setup is usually 5.1 or 7.1. That means 5 or 7 speakers around you on ear level, plus the subwoofer, the .1, also referred to as the LFE channel, low frequency effect. That means you need a studio with a 5.1 or 7.1 speaker layout to mix in that surround format. Dolby's recommendation to mix in Dolby Atmos is to have at least a 7.1.4 speaker setup. That means 7 speakers at ear level, which is your left and right, a center, and 4 surround speakers. The dot 1 again represents the LFE channel, and the dot 4 at the end refers to the number of height or overhead speakers. They are mounted at the ceiling as left-right pairs. Of course, you need a big enough room, especially high enough, to mount all those speakers. Then you need an audio interface with at least 12 output channels, some kind of monitor control device, and most importantly, a lot of money in your bank to buy and install all that stuff. But wait, before you get discouraged and put your dream of mixing in Dolby Atmos away, remember, Dolby recommends those setups. They don't require that. You might have heard of studios that are certified to mix in Dolby Atmos. But that applies now only to big movie productions that are mixed in Dolby Atmos. Dolby figured that if they want to have Dolby Atmos take over the music world and make it the new stereo, they have to be less strict about it. That means your garage turned into home studio or even your bedroom is sufficient to mix your songs in Dolby Atmos. At a minimum, all you need is a pair of headphones, and the magic of binaural audio will do the rest. Now on to the next step. Besides the speakers and headphones, what software and hardware do you need to mix in Dolby Atmos? Although there is one specific software application to mix in Dolby Atmos, the Dolby Atmos renderer, plus some hardware configurations, there are various configurations you have to be aware of to figure out what you need. Best case scenario, you might not need any software or hardware other than what you already have. To mix in Dolby Atmos, you need 2 main components, your DAW and the Dolby Atmos renderer. Let's start with your DAW. The good news is that all the mixing is still done in your DAW. You don't have to learn a new mixing application. All your editing, mixing, plugins, everything can stay the same. The main difference in your mix will be the output routing plus panning, including some adjustments with mixing workflows. That also means remixing your existing songs that you have already mixed in stereo is as simple as opening them back up and make those Dolby Atmos adjustments and additions. You don't have to start from scratch. The second component for mixing in Dolby Atmos is the so-called Dolby Atmos renderer. That is the software application that lets you transform your boring 2-dimensional stereo mix into an exciting 3-dimensional Dolby Atmos mix. Here is the basic signal flow. Your audio is played in your DAW, where you do the mixing as usual. The DAW routes up to 128 audio channels to the Dolby Atmos renderer. The Dolby Atmos renderer is connected to the speakers, so it's like a daisy chain setup. There are 3 types of setups that determine how these 2 components work together. First, setup number 1. The Dolby Atmos renderer is a separate application that you have to buy, $299 or $99 if you are a student or teacher, and there is a 3-month free trial to get your feet wet. That software will run on the same computer as your DAW, but it has to be a Mac. Sorry, no Windows support for this setup. One important aspect is whether the DAW has Dolby Atmos renderer support or not. DAWs fall into 2 categories. Pro Tools on Windows have various features and functionality implemented that makes it easy to communicate with the Dolby Atmos renderer application. These DAWs are used already for years to create Dolby Atmos mixes for movies. On the other hand, DAWs like Ableton Live or Logic Pro 10.6 don't know anything about Dolby Atmos. However, Dolby provides free plugins that enables those DAWs to also mix in Dolby Atmos. Technically, all DAWs can work as long as they have the necessary routing capabilities. Next, setup number 2. This is the same software setup with the two independent applications, the DAW and the Dolby Atmos renderer. However, the Dolby Atmos renderer now runs on a separate computer. This has the advantage that the DAW and the Dolby Atmos renderer can run on a Mac or Windows computer. However, the software now costs $999 in addition to the dedicated computer that you have to purchase from an authorized Dolby reseller. This is a configuration that might be required for more demanding mix jobs where you run sessions with a high track count with lots of plugins that could bring down your computer if you want to run the Dolby Atmos renderer on the same machine. This setup requires a lot of high channel count audio interfaces that can increase the price tag of such a solution quite a bit. The consideration regarding the DAW, if it supports the Dolby Atmos renderer or requires additional plugins, is the same. And finally, setup number 3. This might be the most attractive solution because you could end up having to spend no money at all to get yourself into the Dolby Atmos driver's seat. With this setup, you don't need to buy the Dolby Atmos renderer software because its functionality is integrated directly into the DAW. As of September 2021, only Nuendo and DaVinci Resolve have that full integration. But Apple already announced in June that, and I quote, Apple is building immersive music authoring tools directly into Logic Pro later this year. End of quote. Does that mean integrated Dolby Atmos renderer in Logic? We will see. So it seems to be a trend that more and more DAWs will have Dolby Atmos mixing capabilities built into their software. However, you have to check whether it is a full integration or if the DAW only uses a subset of the Dolby Atmos renderer features. In the end, you might still consider setup number 1 to have access to the full feature set of the Dolby Atmos renderer. Please be aware that there are some confusing naming conventions for the different software packages like Dolby Atmos Production Suite and Dolby Atmos Mastering Suite that both include the almost identical Dolby Atmos renderer plus additional software that is included and other free software that needs to be downloaded separately. I explain all that in my book with more detailed graphics about the various software and computer configurations. Now we know what speakers, software and hardware we need, let's discuss what Dolby Atmos actually is and look at 3 of its key elements. Object-based is a term that you hear a lot when talking about Dolby Atmos. It describes the main difference compared to stereo or other surround formats, which are referred to as channel-based. Channel-based means that the individual tracks in your DAW are routed to a stereo output bus, 2 channels, or a surround bus, more than 2 channels. A pan control on each track lets you determine to which channel you send the signal. For example, center, left, right, half left, etc. The important part is that the mix is committed to a specific channel count, for example, stereo, quad, 5.1 or 7.1. And in order to playback that mix, you need a playback device with the same amount of speakers or it doesn't work. An object-based system lifts that restriction. There are 3 things you have to understand. Number 1, now the output of each track in your session after inserts and level is routed directly without the pan controls to one of the 128 input channels of the Dolby Atmos renderer. Number 2, the pan control on each track, however, is still working. But instead of routing the actual audio signal to available output channels, now whatever pan position you set at the pan control, a single position or changing via automation, will generate metadata similar to GPS data that describes the XYZ coordinates of where in the 3D space you position the audio signal on that track. That metadata will also be sent to the Dolby Atmos renderer along with the corresponding audio signal on that same channel. That signal on that track now is referred to as an object. Keep in mind that this separate transmission of audio signal and its pan information requires some special configuration on your DAW. Number 3. There is an important exception to that concept of audio signal plus metadata that can cause some confusion. The first 10 of the 128 available input channels of the Dolby Atmos renderer are reserved to function as a conventional channel-based routing system. That means on your DAW, you can route a track or multiple tracks to a multi-channel bus, for example 7.1.2, using the surround panel, and those 10 audio channels are sent to 10 input channels of the Dolby Atmos renderer with the pan information baked in, so to speak. That group of input channels is referred to as a bed. So, which tracks on your DAW do you configure as objects that keep the audio signal and pan information separate when sending to the renderer? And which tracks do you configure as beds to use the conventional channel-based routing when sending to the renderer? That is a decision you have to make for each track in your session. Before you start, however, you have to prepare the Dolby Atmos renderer and assign the 128 channels in the renderer, or the ones you need, to either an object or to a bed, and then configure the mapping and routing of the individual tracks in the DAW to those corresponding objects or bed channels. There are many reasons why to map a track to an object or route it to a bed. They fall into the category of personal preferences, best practice, and there are a few technical considerations. I discuss all that in my book, but here are just a few technical considerations. Channel 1 to 10 can only be assigned to a bed, with a channel width of 2.0 up to 10.1.2. The remaining 118 channels can be assigned to objects. You can assign any of those 118 channels as additional beds, but then those channels are not available as objects anymore. Signals that are spatially static or are pre-recorded with a surround format are better routed to a bed. They are only mono objects, one input channel assigned to one object that is mapped to a mono track in your DAW. If you have a stereo track in your DAW, then you have to map it to two objects. You cannot map multi-channel tracks to objects. Signals that you want to position at precise spatial location or want to move around are better mapped to objects. Only tracks in your DAW that are routed to a bed can be sent to the LFE channel. Tracks that are mapped to objects cannot reach the LFE channels without special routing tricks. The third and most important element of Dolby Atmos is the renderer. That is the magic component that makes Dolby Atmos special and not just another surround sound format with height speakers. Remember, channel-based formats are fixed and restricted to their channel count. For example, you need a 5.1 playback system to play a 5.1 mix. Dolby Atmos, on the other hand, is playback agnostic. That means you create only one Dolby Atmos mix and it can play back on systems with any speaker layout: 7.1.2, 11.1.6, 5.1 stereo, binaural headphone, or any of the smart speakers or soundbars that support Dolby Atmos. The concept behind that is fairly simple. All the up to 128 audio channels and their separate pan information, which means the individual location of those audio signals, are fed into the renderer that processes those signals in real time to produce a channel-based output. The only thing you have to tell the renderer is what channel-based output format you want. For example, 7.1.2, 5.1, binaural headphone, all the way down to stereo. Whatever XY position a signal has, the renderer tries to place it into the speaker that is available in that setup. Of course, the more speaker channels you have available, the more precise the spatial reproduction will be. The less speaker channel you have available, the more compromised the end result will be. For example, if there are no height speakers, then those signals will be placed into the nearest surround speakers. And if there are no surround speakers, then the signals will be folded into the plain stereo mix. The mix that you listen to at the end might not be immersive or not be even surround, but you will not lose any signals that were in the original Dolby Atmos mix. With that basic understanding of the Dolby Atmos concept, now let's look at the workflow, the individual steps when mixing in Dolby Atmos. Keep in mind that the following is a very simplified description and that there are a lot of additional details that also vary depending on what DAW you are using. As I already mentioned, all the content of your session is in your DAW as usual, where you do the editing and processing. The big difference is the output routing. Instead of routing everything to a final stereo output bus, now you have 128 audio channels that you can route your tracks to. Those 128 output channels on your DAW represent the 128 input channels of the Dolby Atmos renderer app that are assigned to either objects or beds. Depending on your DAW, you can use either their own surround panel or a free plugin called the Dolby Atmos Music Panel that you can load on each track. The major difference is that for objects, the pan control is not part of the signal flow, and instead any adjustment that you make on the pan control will create separate metadata that are also sent to the corresponding audio input channel of the Dolby Atmos renderer along with the audio signal. That's what you see on the diagram, ignoring the bed concepts for a moment. The heart of the Dolby Atmos renderer application is the renderer. You select what speaker setup you are listening to, for example 7.1.2, and the renderer then processes the 128 input audio signals based on the pan metadata to play your Atmos mix over those output channels. When you change your output format, for example to binaural headphone, then the renderer processes the same 128 input channels plus pan information to play your Atmos mix as a 2-channel binaural audio signal. And here is another important difference. Once you are done mixing, instead of bouncing the Dolby Atmos mix to a WAV file, you record the Atmos mix to a special Dolby Atmos master file that still keeps the 128 audio signals and the panning information separate. It functions similar to a tape machine that has 128 channels that you can record on, record over, punching in and out, or extend your final recording if necessary. In the next workflow step, the DAW is not in the picture anymore. Now you load a previously recorded Dolby Atmos master file, your completed mix, into the Dolby Atmos renderer, and the up to 128 recorded channels of the master file are now the inputs of the Dolby Atmos renderer. The next step is similar to the bounce procedure in a DAW, because now you export the loaded Dolby Atmos master file to a file format for delivery to the mastering engineer, the record company, or your aggregator like DistroKid. That exported file format is an ADM BWF file that you will hear a lot of in the future. This audio definition model broadcast wave format is like a WAV file on steroids. It contains the up to 128 audio channels plus the corresponding pan control metadata and all sorts of other metadata. That ADM BWF file will then be encoded into yet another special bitstream format that will represent your Dolby Atmos mix distributed to the end user via the various music streaming services. And finally, here is another super important fact. The consumer receives the Dolby Atmos mix as an encoded file that still has the audio and pan information separate, with some data reduction. And the Atmos playback device also has a renderer, similar to the one we had in the Dolby Atmos renderer app. It calculates the Dolby Atmos mix to whatever speaker layout is available at the current end user's playback system. If you think about it, the actual mix of your song happens in real time when the user listens to your Dolby Atmos mix, depending on the individual speaker layout. So, to summarize, you have three main tasks when mixing in Dolby Atmos. Task 1 is the actual mixing, mostly done in the DAW, that includes a lot of configurations and monitoring done on the Dolby Atmos renderer app and monitored through various output formats that you can select. Task 2 is the part when your mix is finished and you record it to a Dolby Atmos master file as individual channels in an interleaved audio file. Task 3 is the part where you import the Dolby Atmos master file of your mix back into the Dolby Atmos renderer to export it to the actual delivery format, the ADM BWF file, which is still a special interleaved audio file. The Dolby Atmos renderer also lets you create other exports to create various channel-based versions of your Dolby Atmos mix. For example, a standard WAV file in 5.1 or stereo, or as a binaural mix that you can easily upload as a 2-channel audio file to YouTube that your fans can enjoy as a binaural audio headphone mix. In this chapter, I want to talk about what happens after you finished your mix and it gets delivered to the end consumer. Usually, the musician/engineer/producer doesn't have to worry about the actual distribution mechanism of their music. And luckily so, because it can get very complicated and especially nerdy with all the online and cloud-based delivery procedures. However, with Dolby Atmos mixes, it is a good idea to have at least some kind of understanding what is going on, because there are quite a few steps that affect your mix, besides the fact that you have no idea with what playback system the end user is listening to your song. I provide a more in-depth explanation of those steps in my book to show what happens to your mix. In this section of the video, I just want to touch on a few things. First, the music delivery workflow. On this graphics, I show the comparison of the delivery workflow between the traditional channel-based music production and the new object-based music production of a Dolby Atmos mix. Here are a few differences I want to point out. The delivery format for a master file is different, WAV file versus the ADM BWF file. I then show the step of the mastering, but they have to reinvent their workflow for Dolby Atmos mixes. The encoding process and all the various file formats are different. That's where it gets complicated, with DD plus JOC and AC4/IMS encoding formats, but also important because these are the steps where the various algorithms mess around with your mix to squeeze it to deliver the data over the internet. The actual distribution pipeline, however, is similar, but the most important component happens at the end user when they play back the Atmos file. That is where the Atmos renderer is involved to convert the Dolby Atmos mix into a channel-based format. That renderer component is where Apple's spatial audio can put another dent into your mix. Here's a graphic to scare you just a little. It shows the various components along the distribution chain that can negatively affect your Dolby Atmos mix that you worked on so hard. It all starts with your perfect 3-dimensional Atmos mix. It is distributed through different music streaming services, each using a slightly different technology. Then the end user listens on different platforms that run on different operating systems, all with their own little twists. Then the renderer that converts the object-based file into the channel-based output is different depending on what device the user is listening to, and then finally what speaker setup the user has. Now you get the idea why you should be aware of those variables and how they affect your Atmos mix. And last but not least, a word about Apple's spatial audio that puts a special twist on Dolby Atmos music mixes. Remember when Apple rolled out that feature for the Apple Music streaming service in June 2021? They didn't just say Apple Music now plays back songs mixed in Dolby Atmos. No, instead, they said that Apple Music now has spatial audio with support for Dolby Atmos. So why did they use that sneaky wording? The simple answer is yes, they play back the original Dolby Atmos mix, but they don't use the Dolby Atmos renderer technology. Let's pause and let that sink in for a moment. When you mix your Dolby Atmos track, you listen to the Dolby Atmos renderer. But when the user listens to that song on the Apple Music streaming service, that Dolby Atmos mix is rendered by Apple's own engine, their own renderer that then produces the channel-based output from the object-based Atmos mix. Do you need another pause to let that sink in? There are other confusions based on additional variables as I show on this diagram. As you can see, at some point, Apple is actually using the Dolby Atmos renderer instead of their own Apple renderer. More detailed information about all that in my book and explanations of the not-so-intuitive spatial audio implementation on the various Apple devices. Now let's have a closer look at headphones and binaural audio and the reason why it will be the key to success for Dolby Atmos and immersive audio in general. I showed in the previous section that music recordings were stuck with stereo and never had a chance to evolve to surround or even to an immersive sound format. There are two simple reasons: cost and convenience. Enjoying films in movie theaters is a closed environment. You have no control over the technology. You just pay the ticket. So when the technology evolved from mono to stereo to surround and then immersive, it just happened without the control of the consumer. They just got a better experience and the gradual increase of movie tickets that paid for the new implementations. Yes, there are home theater systems, but only a small portion of households have installed a nice surround system in their living room or basement. However, there is some movement with increased adoption rate in this sector with new technological advancements by using speaker virtualization that I also cover in my book. Now, music consumption is a different story because the user is in charge of acquiring the medium, vinyl, CD or streaming, and they have to buy the playback system. That's where the two C's come in place: cost and convenience. In the old days, everybody remotely interested in good sound quality of their music collection invested in a decent hi-fi system. These days are gone, and the younger generation doesn't even know anymore what a hi-fi store was. Music is mainly consumed on portable devices, starting with MP3 players like the iPod around the year 2000, and nowadays virtually everybody has a cell phone, and that is the main device of playing back music. And here's the important part: they listen over headphones. It is estimated that 80% of music is now consumed over headphones. And here you have it, the reason why surround sound never caught on for music recording. It was just too expensive to buy the equipment with all the extra speakers and the inconvenience where to place them or mount them. There was no chance of adoption in the mass consumer market. In an interesting twist, the consumer market actually now moved towards the technology, if you will. They decided not to buy any playback equipment and use the cell phone and the earbuds they already have to listen to music, the cheapest and most convenient solution. However, if you think that this would be the deciding factor to stick with stereo, then you forgot the magic sauce, and that is a technology called binaural audio. If you consider to mix in Dolby Atmos or just listen to Dolby Atmos music, you have to understand binaural audio. There are a lot of buzzwords around that, like binaural rendering, headphone virtualization, HRTF, or head tracking, and I explain all that in my book. Here's just a quick rundown. Although we have only two ears, that's where the term binaural is coming from, we can hear three-dimensional, locating sound all around us. Our brain makes all that possible by comparing the sound entering the left and right ear and analyzing its level, timing, and frequency difference caused by our head and the shape of our ears. You can simulate that binaural listening by sticking 2 tiny microphones inside your ear and playback that recording over headphones. This is called binaural recording, usually done with a dummy head. There are plenty of examples on YouTube that demonstrate that effect. The key element is that you need only 2 audio channels, played back over headphones, and you can achieve the impression of hearing sound playing around you instead of playing inside your head or in the left or right ear like with stereo headphones. This is where you have to pay attention to the terminology. Stereo headphone means playing back a conventional 2-channel stereo signal over headphones. Binaural headphone means you also play back 2 channels, but it is a special binaural signal that achieves that 3D listening effect. You can also artificially create a binaural audio signal by processing a signal and to position it anywhere in 3D space, and when listening back over headphones, you will get the sensation that it is coming from that direction. That is called binaural rendering. Binaural rendering uses a complex math function called HRTF, or a head-related transfer function, that simulates the shape of the head and ear. Because those shapes are different for each person, that binaural renderer in most applications uses an average shape, with the drawback that the more your own shape is different from the average shape, the less convincing the 3D experience will be. That's why you have different testimonies about how convincing binaural audio sounds. The remedy for that is to use your own measurement for the binaural processing, which is called personalized HRTF. This is a complicated process done in an anechoic chamber. Here's a picture of me where they measured my personalized HRTF, done at the Harman Research Center here in Los Angeles. This part of the technology is still developing, with lots of money and efforts going in from many companies. That means the Dolby Atmos playback, what you experience right now regarding the immersive experience, will improve quite a bit over the next few years, once it is easier to create personalized HRTFs and import them into your playback device. Apple, with their own spatial audio technology, added some unnecessary confusion. Although they don't mention the term binaural audio, they are using their own renderer, also referred to as headphone virtualization. This is actually a big problem because right now the majority of Dolby Atmos music is consumed over headphones via the Apple Music streaming service. But when mixing in Dolby Atmos with the Dolby Atmos renderer and monitoring your binaural signal over headphones, then this mix is different from what is played back on Apple Music. Head tracking is another key element of binaural audio that is already implemented in Apple's spatial audio. Once you understand the concept, don't think it is only relevant when watching movies that have a visual reference point. It can also improve the music listening experience. Keep in mind that our brain automatically moves our head slightly to better locate sound. So head tracking is not only good for giving you the experience of a live concert, it is important for overall spatial localization. Again, a lot of exciting research and development going on as we speak. Here is a simple demonstration to understand the difference between a stereo headphone signal and a binaural headphone signal. Please put on your headphones. My voice represents the mono signal. When I pan it in the center, it would appear as a phantom image in the middle of the 2 loudspeakers. But when listening over the headphones, the signal appears inside the head, which is unnatural because sound sources always happen outside your body. Now when I pan the mono signal towards the left, more to the left, more to the left, it would move towards the left speaker in front of you, but over the headphones it is still stuck inside the head, moving towards your left ear, which is even worse because your brain signals an alert. In nature, that only happens if a signal is projected directly into one ear without reaching the other ear. That means someone or something is so close to you that it could cause danger. The same thing happens when you pan to the right side, more to the right, more to the right, more to the right. On the headphone, it is now playing in your right ear. That means your brain locates that thread on your right side. Listen to jazz recordings where two players are panned extremely left or right, or worse, podcasts where two guests are panned left-right. The drier the signal, the more uneasy the experience. With loudspeakers, that doesn't happen because you will get a crossfeed between left and right loudspeaker, plus the additional room acoustics that adding to the signal. Now let's do the same where the monosignal of my voice is running through a binaural renderer. The experience is now that the voice should appear in front of you instead of inside your head. And when I pan the signal to the left, more to the left, more to the left, the renderer processes the signal in a way that the brain hears that it is moving to the left, but you have the feeling of a room position, so the signal is not stuck exclusively inside one ear. Now when I pan to the right, my voice moves to the right, but still not stuck inside the ear. Now I have panned my voice all the way to the right, to the right, to the right. There are a lot of things you have to play around with, to be aware of, and often unlearn unnatural practices that we grew accustomed to when listening to headphones. I encourage you to subscribe to Apple Music and listen to Dolby Atmos music mixes over headphones as much as you can, and constantly switching back and forth between stereo and Dolby Atmos to experience the difference. Okay, that sums it up about my video about Dolby Atmos. For more in-depth explanation, please check out my book Mixing in Dolby Atmos Part 1 How It Works, with information and details you won't find anywhere else. All the links are on my website dingdingmusic.com. Don't forget to subscribe and check the bell for notifications about exciting new videos in this Music Tech Explained YouTube channel. In addition, you can read my free Logic and Pro Tools tutorials on my website. And please explore the books in my graphically enhanced manual series. They are available in different formats, as PDFs from my website, as iBooks on the Apple Bookstore, and Kindle and printed books on Amazon. All the links are available on my website dingdingmusic.com.